State Department told congressional staff on Thursday that 176 Americans are still seeking to leave Afghanistan. This comes as Southwest Airlines says its recent cancellations cost the airline $75 million. The U.S. Federal Reserve on Thursday banned top officials from buying individual company stocks. This comes 6 weeks after reports of active stock trading by senior policymakers triggered an ethics uproar. And businesses are reporting that vaccine mandates contribute to nationwide labor shortages. That's according to the Federal Reserve. They say some businesses are also concerned about implementing mandates due to potential loss of workers. Tune into Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. Let's begin with reports of Americans still seeking to leave Afghanistan, nearly 200 of them. The State Department informed congressional staff Thursday it's in touch with 363 U.S. citizens in the nation, and 176 of them want to leave. That's according to two sources familiar with the call. The number underscores the ongoing challenge the Biden administration faces as Americans continue to come forward to seek help in leaving Afghanistan in the wake of the Taliban takeover and the chaotic U.S. withdrawal. A State Department spokesperson noted this week that more people have come forward amid the ongoing evacuation efforts. Now, speaking of airlines, Southwest Airlines says its recent cancellations cost the airline $75 million. On Thursday, Southwest warned investors to expect some hits in its revenue this quarter. It pointed to problems earlier this month that led to the cancellations of more than 2,000 flights. The company's revenue also suffered due to the pandemic. Southwest believes it lost $100 million in sales in August alone because of the surge, and $200 million in sales in September. Overall, third quarter revenue for the airline is down compared to pre-pandemic levels, but it is up 161% compared to a year ago. Now, the company will cut back on flights in December. That's to avoid a similar shortfall due to, quote, more conservative staffing assumptions. The company recently backed off a plan to place unvaccinated workers on unpaid leave if they haven't obtained a medical or religious exemption by December 8th. It is unclear if the move to cut flights in December had to do with the vaccine mandate. December is one of travel's busy times when millions of Americans travel for Christmas and New Year's. Southwest CEO Gary Kelly said in the Thursday news release, quote, "We are aggressively hiring to a goal of approximately 5,000 new employees by the end of this year, and we are currently more than halfway toward that goal." Southwest is also facing a lawsuit by its main pilots union, the Southwest Airlines Pilots Association, which asked a court to block the company's vaccine requirement. The union argued that pilots face a unique risk from possible vaccine side effects due to the stringent medical hurdles they have to clear in order to fly. Now, let's turn to big changes at the federal level. The Federal Reserve is now banning its senior staff and policymakers from active trading and buying individual stocks. The new restrictions announced on Thursday come after some controversy over trades made by senior Fed officials. The new rules will limit the types of financial securities the Fed's top officials can own. It includes an outright ban on directly buying shares of publicly traded companies or holding individual bonds. Buying shares in mutual funds or exchange-traded funds is still permitted. But the clampdown requires officials to give advance notice and obtain prior approval of any transactions, and demands any new investments be held for at least a year. In a statement, Fed Chair Jerome Powell said these tough new rules raise the bar high in order to assure the public we serve that all of our senior officials maintain a single-minded focus on the public mission of the Federal Reserve. Under the new rules, officials will have to provide 45 days notice in advance of buying or selling any securities that are still allowed. According to a news release, officials will also be required to hold the securities for at least a year, and they cannot buy or sell funds during heightened financial market stress. The new rules come after 2 of the 12 regional Federal Reserve Bank presidents resigned after reports of their active trading during 2020. The Fed has purchased more than $4 trillion worth of bonds since the early days of the pandemic. That was to bolster the economy through liquidity and low interest rates. The Fed has also bought billions in corporate bonds of some of the biggest names on Wall Street in an effort to keep the market running. Last month, the heads of Federal Reserve banks in Boston and Dallas stepped down after criticism of their personal stock investments. Senator Elizabeth Warren has called for the Securities and Exchange Commission to investigate the trading activity. Earlier on Thursday, the senator called for the Federal Reserve to release a March 2020 ethics warning that was allegedly provided to Fed officials. In her letter, Warren called for the information to be released immediately, saying, quote, so that Congress and the public can evaluate the extent to which Fed officials may have known of the risks from their trading, and if they ignored calls by ethics officials to avoid this scandalous behavior. The new restrictions also promise to increase the timeliness of reporting and public disclosure by the Fed's board members and regional managers. And speaking of the Federal Reserve, the most recent report confirmed the nationwide labor shortages. It also cited vaccine mandates as one of the contributing factors. The report said that while employment has increased at a moderate rate in recent weeks, the U.S. economy's been, quote, dampened by a low supply of workers, partially due to vaccine mandates. In its summary of overall national economic activity, the Fed said firms reported high turnover as workers left for other jobs or retired. Childcare issues and vaccine mandates were widely cited as contributing to the problem, along with COVID-related absences. Individual Fed banks reported cases of employees quitting over mandates. And while some regions reported that few businesses lost employees over the mandates, others said companies were worried that implementing a vaccine requirement could cost them workers. The Atlanta Fed said in the report, most employers share that they would like to implement COVID-19 vaccine mandates, but were concerned about losing employees, adding worries about employee mental health, burnout, safety, and vaccine mandates impacting company culture were mentioned. According to the most recent data from the Labor Department, around 4.3 million workers quit their jobs in August. That figure represents an all-time high since record-keeping began in December of 2000. Last month, President Joe Biden ordered a vaccine mandate for federal workers, healthcare staff, and federal contractors. Biden also announced a mandate for private businesses, but it has yet to go into effect. And the House Committee on Small Business Subcommittee on Oversight, Investigations, and Regulations recently held a hearing on the supply chain issues currently facing small business owners. The members of the subcommittee said they wanted to help small businesses lessen the economic effects of the pandemic lockdowns and supply chain issues. Chairman Dean Phillips said, as I mentioned, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed cracks that have long been present at nearly every connection point in our global supply chain, and this is adding considerable economic stress to small businesses already suffering from the economic fallout of the pandemic. Chief business economist at IHS Markit, Chris Williamson, said in a statement, the pace of U.S. economic growth cooled further in September, having soared in the second quarter, reflecting a combination of peaking demand, supply chain delays, and labor shortages. The cost of goods was historically high in September. That's as companies faced higher prices of input materials and greater wage demands. The rate of cost inflation was the highest in 4 months and the second highest on record. Williamson went on to note the result was, quote, yet another month of sharply rising prices charged for goods and services as demand outpaces supply and higher costs are passed on to customers. As for ways to help, Phillips urged the subcommittee members to support the bipartisan infrastructure bill that will be up for consideration later this month. He says it will improve the infrastructure needed for the smooth running of the nation's supply chain and create new jobs. He said there is no magic solution. I was hoping we might come here today and find that magic wand that we could just solve this problem. The truth is, I didn't hear one actionable solution that we could implement today to solve the problem. We have to make investments, long-term, strategic, thoughtful, and intentional by both Democrats and Republicans. And now before we end, the oldest living male giraffe in the U.S., if not in the world, is now the animal equivalent of hospice care. Jimmy the giraffe has lived at Plumpton Park Zoo in Maryland for 25 years. The zoo reports the 3,000-pound animal now lives in a new state-of-the-art giraffe barn with a team of veterinarians handling his medical care. Being 26 years old is a feat for Jimmy. That's because male giraffes rarely make it to 20. A foot or leg problem often leads to an early death. The zoo says Jimmy developed a hoof problem back in 2010, but thanks to his medical care, the zoo says he has defied the odds for over 11 years. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and have a wonderful weekend.